que te quiero y te quiero decir que sin tu amor no puedo vivir. Te quiero y no niego, mi corazón es para ti. Te quiero y da miedo que pronto acabe de existir. Todo lo que quiero yo lo haré en la vida. La fe que me nace es por ti, mi vida. Todo lo que quiero yo lo haré en la vida. Todo lo que tengo. Y bien, ya ves que sigo esperándote aquí. Y bien, ya ves que sin ti no puedo vivir. Ven que te quiero y te quiero decir que sin tu amor no puedo vivir. Te quiero y no niego, mi corazón es para ti. Te quiero y da miedo que pronto acabe de existir. Todo lo que quiero yo lo haré en la vida. La fe que me
tiempos de desespero no podemos olvidar, no podemos olvidar en tiempos de desespero. Me toca de por dentro la guía que se nos da en tiempo de desespero, no podemos olvidar el fuego que arde por dentro, la guía que se nos da en tiempos de desespero, no podemos olvidar. En escombros de un amor hay chispas que persisten, el rencor hace el odio, con el tiempo se maldice, la necedad del rincón como ya no se repite, hacia el canto del arriero la memoria sí persiste. improvisados que nunca se olvidará, que nunca se olvidará, momentos improvisados.
Comentarios en silencio, la verdad nunca se va. Momentos improvisados que nunca se olvidará.
Comentarios en silencio, la verdad nunca será. Momentos improvisados que nunca se olvidará.
En escombros de un amor hay chispas que persisten. Del rencor nace el odio, con el tiempo se maldice. La necedad del rencor, como ya nos que repite, hacia el canto del arriero, la memoria sí persiste. Soñé volverme en las nubes, son honores y rasgos, elegir cualquier camino, soñar en mi liderazgo. No hay destino que me invade, me transformo como quiera, seré nube de tormenta o sombra sobre la sierra. Momentos improvisados que nunca se olvidarán. Comentarios en silencio, la verdad nunca se va.
Un fuego que yace dentro, la guía que se nos da, el fuego que arde por dentro, que siempre nos guiará.
La necesidad de rencor, como ya nos que repiten, así el canto del arriero, la memoria sí persiste.
Fuego que yace dentro, la guía que se nos da, el fuego que arde por dentro, que siempre nos guiará.
No hay destino que me invade, me transformo como quiera, seré nube de tormenta o sombra sobre la sierra.
Que yace dentro, la guía que se nos da, el fuego que arde por dentro, y siempre nos guiará.
Tan, tan. Thank you, guys. All right. That was my partner in life and in crime, Quetzal Flores, and my son, Sandino Gonzalez Flores, sharing a song.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you. It was amazing and beautiful. It was a good way to start. I'm Luis Rodriguez, co-founder of Tia Chucha Centro Cultural. This is a fundraiser for Tia Chuchas, and there's a number of ways to donate. It's underneath whatever you're looking at should be letting you know how to donate. And we also want to sell books, and the book that we really want to emphasize right now is Marta's book. And Marta will talk more about it because dialogue will be about the work she's been doing that she's documented very well in this book. But first of all, Marta, thank you so much for being in this dialogue. And it will be you and me talking. We'll let the spirits move us. That's the way we work it. But the first thing I want to say is explain a little bit about the work you're doing and why you wanted to do a book like this. Because you're talking about Artivistas, which you could explain more what that means. But I do think that writing a book is another level of Artivista. You know, it's part of the same struggle. People say, well, you're organizing and stuff like that. But if you're writing books, you're also helping organize. You're helping change people's minds. You're giving them knowledge and data and history. And this is an important part of the struggle. Sometimes we forget that. So anyway, I want you to just talk a little bit about where you're at, why the book, and what it all means for everyone here.
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for Tia Chuchas and Luis and Michael and Karen, everybody who made this possible. I really appreciate it for having me here today. Um, you know, we go back a long ways, right? At the beginning of Tia Chuchas, and really probably before then, as you know, I was reading your work and really inspired by writers like yourself, and so I think that having that tradition in our culture is important. And as you grow and you live and you're part of different movements and you experience things that have been transformative in your life, in your own life, you begin to sort of think about, not only because you've read other people's stories and what they've lived, you know, and how important it informed and inspired you. I think that not in the moment, but I think that years later, and especially when I went to grad school, I started realizing that a lot of the, you know, what I had lived and all the people that I knew, all the movements that I had been a part of and continue to be a part of, were important and enough to talk about. That perhaps my perspective would be an important one of many voices that are possible in just talking about it. And so that's what really led me to finally, you know, not only write about this in my dissertation, but and then the natural progression is to, after the dissertation, and if you know, get a tenure track job, and then you're working as hard there, but part of it is also hopefully that at some point the research that you did as part of your PhD and all the work that you wrote about it becomes manifest in a book such as this. And so that's what led me here.
Yeah. So one of the things I found fascinating is that, as you know, I was involved in activista work, even though we didn't call it that then, in the 60s and 70s. I came out of a poor barrio, South San Gabriel, Las Lomas, in the San Gabriel Valley. There was poor as any neighborhood anywhere. But out of that place, I became an artivista. I did murals. I painted murals because I was a graffiti artist. Somebody told me to paint murals. I went to the Strata Courts housing projects and saw the amazing murals they were doing. I got taught by the Goes Art Gallery when it's still around, but it was really big deal. And I would go to all the Chicano-oriented cafes and shops like Mi Chicano. I was also active. I knew Sister Karen, a self-graphic. I
Wow.
had an office there off Brooklyn, well, old Brooklyn. I
Yeah,
was I was helping run Chisma Arte magazine, the literature Chicano literary and art magazine, and I was doing the Barrio Rise workshops, and I was also doing the Raza reading series where we
mm,
had Lorna Di
okay.
Cervantes and we had Gary Soto and Jose Montoya, some of the old time poets and writers of the time. But we worked with artists and musicians, and I knew Asco, you know, I knew Willie Heron, and I knew, of course, Harry Gamboa. We were all coming up at the same time. Nobody remembers me. Uh, I was like this. I was kind of like on the side. Nobody remembers me.
You
I
were
said, "You're the
quiet side.
guy." I know, but we also started the first gallery in Echo Park. Now it's full of galleries, but most of them are mostly, I would say, white. You know, or I'm not saying they're all bad, but I'm just saying it's different. When we started Galeria Ocaso right there on Sunset in Mission Torino. It was the first Chicano performance-based gallery there. And so we have a lot of. I'm bringing all this up to let you know. Then when I was in Chicago, I got very active in the movimiento there,
Mm,
and I
mhm.
helped start the Guild Complex, which is a literary and arts center that became eventually the basis for Tia Chuchas when we came out here. Because
Wow.
me and my wife Trini had all this history. She came out of Pacoima, you know, and I came out of Vista Lake. We were in Chicago together, then we came back. So we carried that spirit, and Tia Chuchas has been around for 20 years. But
Mm.
one of the things that I found interesting, I haven't had a chance to finish reading it. Oh my God, it's a beautiful book. I
Oh,
had a great time reading it, and I want to talk about your family because that was one of the most important parts that I'm reading. But I do want to say that you were there in the 90s, and maybe talk a little bit about what the 90s were for you, especially on the east side, and really all the barrios that we know.
Yeah, of course. I think that part of the distinction that I make between the different generations, and I think that in our time, there are a lot of things. This book is really covering, it's a lot of autoethnography, as you know, and I talk a lot about my own experience and the movement or the experience in the movement through my eyes, right? And really all these different community moments that led me to a different kind of philosophy on how to think about music, right? Because it is true that early generation of Chicano artists, activists, just being a Chicano artist, right? We can definitely think about it as something that's artwork and different mediums that are political, right? In nature, by nature of just calling yourself Chicano, right? But I think that our generation was really moved, not just and inspired by our previous generation, of course, and based on all the work that they did, filling the canon and really pushing the envelope on representation and content, of course. But I think that our generation was sort of taking the cue from our predecessors, but then also really inspired by some of the work that the Zapatistas, right, the indigenous movement of the Mayan indigenous movement, gave us. And that is a really important and self-critique on neoliberalism, right, and capitalism, and how when we come to think about, I mean, there were many teachings, right, and continue to have these dialogues with these communities, but one of the things that we realize is that capital and capitalism, right, really alters the way we think about even our own artwork, right? That it can easily co-opt even the most radical thoughts and movements, right? In other words, neoliberalism and capitalism can also sell revolution, right? And I think that it's easy. Sometimes it becomes easy for us to lose ourselves down that path, right? And if we don't stay connected and active in creating and staying connected to community, then we can say that we lose our way, right? Or the messages we're trying to give lose their roaring potential, right? And one of the things that we realized especially in an Encuentro Cultural Chicano Indígena that happened in 1997, which I chronicle a lot of in this book, is that we realized that as artists, our generation needs to not only continue to build the canon, right? To create work. I'm myself, I'm a musician. I'm in a band, Quetzal. We continue to record albums and the things that we think are important, of course. But then we also have this whole other body of work that is involved in being in music with community, and basing it on process, right? Using our skill sets como músicos, in this case we're musicians, músicos, to go into community and build processes out, build a culture around. And the things I talk about in the book, some of it is engaging in fandango practice and finding ways of connecting with other communities. Other things are like, doing collective songwriting workshops, right? Using our skill sets in those ways. And we come to realize that to us, being an artivista in that way is really signaling not just to building content, right? But also in building processes that can outlive us, right? So it's not just the body of work that we create, it's also the ways in which we think about music and art that we're trying to sort of change or build the appetite or that muscle for the process-based work that we also need to do,
Yeah, that's amazing. One of the things that I found fascinating is the connection with the Zapatistas, because I think that as Chicanos, we've been, the border is really just a border, but it's actually a big gap in our cultural connections, our roots. So many Chicanos here don't even know what part of Mexico, or if there's even an Indígena group there. They don't really know who they are. And a lot of our parents didn't want to talk about Mexico that much. My parents didn't. But I found that for Chicanos, being connected to the Indígena was very important. And in the 80s, for me, it was Uchitan, Oaxaca, because they had an uprising. And I went down there. And it's just like Chiapas was so big for the 90s, actually was even bigger for the world. Wichitan was our Chiapas. We went down there. The Zapoteco people took over the city halls. They took over everything. They had a radio station. They're talking their language. They eventually ended up running because the pre used to always mess them up, shoot machine gun people, kill people when they were having elections. But they eventually won. The Kosei was the group that was there, and I went down there and I got taken by them, and taken to the point where I thought I was going to live there for the rest of my life. You
Oh,
kind of really, as a Chicano, you're looking for who you are, your heritage, and you fall in love with Mexico. You fall in love with the people. But I remember one of the artivistas there, because they had a lot of arts going on, and
mhm.
they told me, "You're welcome. You can stay, but you're really needed in Los Angeles." Can you imagine that
Mhm.
we really
Mhm.
need you there? We need you to tell our story there.
Yeah.
It was very important. It was so that I could realize that I'm actually Chicano, Chicanas, Chicanx, and that I have a role here that was very important that would help the people there.
Yeah.
So that was important for me because I took that spirit with me. And then when Chiapas happened, as you know, especially a lot of Tiachuchas people went out there too, a lot of our young youth, they learned so much, but we always, of course, if they want to stay, it's their business. I've had some people staying there. I've never heard from them since. But the other hand of it, we told them, come back and just do the work. Just come back and do the work. And that's something that I know you were emphasizing a lot.
Yes, absolutely. And that's said, right? Like, I think that you saw the trend of in the 90s of like, people, donning the dress and like,
Hmm.
doing all of these things that they, almost like becoming, trying to
Hmm.
become zapatistas, right? Or más bien, that's never possible, right? Because they were so entrenched and still have their language and
Hmm.
the way their clothing,
Hmm.
the way they grow
Yeah.
their food, their lifestyle, and that I think they saw the solidarity being manifested in that very obvious way. But then they were always like, desde sus propias trincheras, from your own trenches, you can
Hmm.
support what we're doing. We have a very
Yeah.
similar struggle. Like, one of the first things I remember asking about, and it's funny how we're led to believe this in Western culture, thinking about when we were having discussions on, or we realized that, okay, we're going to have an encuentro and we need to prepare. They said, you guys need to dialogue amongst yourself and get to know each other and really come together so that when you come here, you're a complete body and you can dialogue with us. And so we spent almost a year organizing or dialoguing with each other amongst ourselves, the Big Frente Zapatista. And one of the first things I asked, I remember thinking, okay, so if we're gonna go, should we start collecting, clothes and like, you know,
Mhm.
you know, shoes and things like that, as if with that ideology that indigenas need things, right? They don't no
Mhm.
tienen, they're lacking
Mhm.
something, right? And they were like, oh, no, 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 ustedes no vienen, you don't come here
Mhm.
to save us. And you're not
Mhm.
coming here to give us
Mhm.
clothes. As a matter of fact, we make our own clothes. You guys have to
Mhm.
help yourselves. We're asking you to come as complete
Exactly.
people. Like, you got to help yourself. And we're like, oh, shit. Okay. And it's absolutely true. It was a paternalistic and, very Western white way of looking
Mhm.
at them because we could carry, white supremacy in that same way as well or enact
Yeah.
it, right? And they were like, no, they quickly
Mhm.
put us in our place and and we realized quickly that
Yeah.
it was going to be a dialogue. And when we left there, we were so energized and
Mhm.
completely just inspired, and we hit the ground running.
Yeah. And I think your work, but also the work of all the people that learned from the Zapatistas that went down there and came back, has heightened the level of consciousness, awareness, and activity in our barrios. It happened in Chicago when I was there. Zapatistas is very big. There was a big movement of people going back and forth, but it organized us as gente in our barrios. Because again, you're right. You get kind of romanticized after a while, and I get it. It makes sense.
Yeah.
What are my roots? You know,
Yeah.
okay, but you don't want to do that. And they're very clear. They were very clear in Oaxaca too. Our struggle is here. Our struggle for them is here. you
That's
know
right.
our
Yeah.
struggle that we get organized is here,
Yeah.
and we can take that spirit, as you say,
Hmm.
and make it come alive in our neighborhoods, which I know you have done. I know all the musicians and artists and people that I work with that all over the years. That's what they do. Tia Chuchas is really about that as much as
Yeah.
anything, and so I see that has been, I guess, the legacy that you learn from
Yeah.
going back home, and realizing one thing for us, Chicanos, home is wherever we are.
Mhm.
I am Tarumara from my mother's side, so I went down to the Copper Canyon. I met the people,
Wow.
amazing, beautiful, and they, what they would say in the beginning is, "Oh, you're not Tarumara, you're Mexicano, you're Mexican,"
Mm.
because I don't look Tarumara, I look Mexican, and I
Mhm.
thought, "Aren't you Mexican?" He said, "No, no, somos Raramuri." That's what they would say. We're somos Raramuri. Okay, but then when I told him I was looking for my roots, he says, "I have a mother and great grandmother and grandmother that came from here." They were so surprised. They go, "Really?" And they opened their doors because you know what they said? Nobody comes back. So we
Wow.
lose so many gente, nobody comes back. You really interested in us? I go, yeah, I really am. And then they were beautiful. They opened their doors. They taught me things. They brought me to houses. They even at one point, pobrecito, they have ejidos, which
Yeah.
the native people own. They can't give them land, but they were going to give me a little bit of land that I could build a little hut on. Can you imagine? They were so beautiful. And of course, I wasn't going to do that because I knew I got to come back. I got to come back and carry the struggle here. But
Yeah.
anyway, but that connection is important. But I do think is what you're saying. Whatever we do, let's take the struggle where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
Our people, for the most part, I feel maybe not everybody is lost. Modernity, as you point out in your book, is a culture of loss,
Mm-hmm.
and being uprooted seems to be the main thing that's in there. So
Mm.
you really don't connect because modernity is about the new man, the new person. Like all of a sudden, all the roots are gone, all the entanglements are gone, and people constantly remaking themselves. But
Yeah.
that's what modernity is, and then you lose those important ties. Tell me more about how you saw that because I started reading that in your book. I thought that was a very important point you were making.
Yeah, there is a book that really inspired me that I read in grad school, and it's called El México Profundo by Bonfil
Hmm.
Batalla,
I've read that book.
and
Beautiful book.
that is he talks about the de-Indianization of the
Yeah.
subject, right? Of the and El México Profundo would be the indígenas, right? That Mexico as a nation state has never recognized, and um, and the idea that el olvido, right, to forget where you came from, and this thing that they say, it makes sense to me that the Raramuris are saying, wow, nobody ever really comes back to try to figure out who they are or to even recognize their roots because they're not encouraged to, right? Society and Mexico, as I mentioned, Mexico is one of those, like many countries and in Latin America, were sort of are trying to catch up to modernity or modernizing, right? Which the West sets, right? They're the ones that set the marker and say, this is, we are first world and you are third world. And that's a whole way, a construct, right? That's a social construct that is so that, they want, so that they rearrange the economic system, which means they change their entire value system, all of those things, which is what affected my dad, which is how we think about it. And so it makes sense to me that our society doesn't have these processes, this process of like music cultures that are about just doing music in community, just for the hell of it. Most of the time, the way we think about music and art in general is something you buy or something you sell, you know? Music is never just something, we don't have these things in our culture that are just about hanging out and being with each other, which is why I think Fandango is so important, and has been so important for so many communities in the US right now, all over Mexico, nation state,
Yeah.
no nomás en Veracruz, but also all over the US. People like need to feel close to each other, not because they're starting groups and trying to make a lot of money and record. Some are, but besides that, a lot of people connect because they feel alive, something in them. They're like, shit, why didn't I ever do this before? How come, which is beautiful that, Tia Chuchas was one of the first places that offered, fandango classes, the Eastside Cafe, you have, of course, El Hormiguero, right? But then also, other places, Santana,
Yeah.
in Chicago, there's a
Oh,
whole
Chicago's
movement,
a
right?
big, yeah.
It's amazing. And so those things, it's no accident, right? And that kind of process and being able with our skill sets to be able to teach as many people and now it's like people are teaching others and de eso se trata, that's what it's all about. But and then there's other ways, right? But I just think that art, we need to I think the commodities of art and music and other forms of creative expression are never going to be obsolete. They're important, of course, but I think that we need to also create social spaces that are also about just process, like, you know, and it doesn't just have to happen in church, because those are the first few places that it's not about commoditizing. It's about just getting that spirit out or whatever it is. Pero creo que in our histories and in our cultural legacies as Mexicanos, as Raramuris, as I don't know, like in my case, I don't even know what indigenous group I would belong to. In Guadalajara would be what, Cora?
Huichol,
Or Huichol.
Cora, there's Cora, yeah.
Huichol and Cora, you know, like there are cultural and musical processes there that I'm sure exist that would be interesting to go in there and create and do and learn, and, you know, and so anyhow, those are some of the interesting part is that in 1997, and every person that went to that encuentro, and if they were artists and practitioners or did some kind of art, they came back and we all kind of had the same idea. A lot of those folks are still doing their own careers, but also engaging in process-based work. And that is the uniqueness of, I think, of our generation, that also have that kind of armed with those kinds of things as well, and the urgency to create those spaces.
And that creation is within us. It doesn't have to be given to us. We're not just consumers of other creations, and we're not just working. You know, when you're an artist, you end up having to work for the industry, but they're usually telling you what to do, what kind of art. And again, I'm not against anybody doing that. I get it. Got to make a living.
No, of course.
But I think it's important to have those spaces that belong to us, where we are creative, where we express ourselves, where nobody's judging or criticizing. Just let it be, and it's ours. One thing I was wondering if maybe we could show one of your videos.
Sure.
This would be a good time if we can do that.
So maybe I can, you know, one of the first things we learned in the 1997 Encuentro is this collective songwriting workshops, right? Where the community, it's not about creating a song to sell or anything like that. What this was about is writing a song collectively gets community to sort of think in a non-linear way, meaning that when you have to write a poem, I mean, usted sabe, right? When you have to write a poem or, you know, or when you have to write a song, the mind goes somewhere else. It becomes more abstract. There's something that happens. And so when you write a song as community, it's really powerful. And I just want to show you this video. It's the collective songwriting video. And I think Michael's going to help us with that.
¿Qué dice eso? A ver, habla un poquito más. Al decir transparencia en la escuela, explíqueme más. ¿Quién dijo eso?
Tienen que trabajar con los padres y darnos el derecho de poder escoger la forma de cómo trabajar con nuestra juventud.
Collective songwriting really brings the community in to do the work of music. It really brings them in to engage in that process. And by having them be a part of that process gives them a sense of ownership to the ideas, to the discussions that are taking place while they're creating music, as a way of articulating something beyond what's written on paper or what's being suggested by somebody else. This is something that music allows them to create for themselves. And I think that has been the most powerful thing to witness in every one of these spaces.
Este evento fue maravilloso, iluminarte, porque me iluminó hasta ser como compositora de canciones. Fue algo muy divertido, expresivo, en donde podemos transmitir sobre el arte, sobre la educación, sobre nuestros derechos, y esto mismo que aprendimos vamos a transmitirlo a nuestros hijos y a nuestra comunidad.
We've had workshops on DACA DAPA and deferred action. We've had workshops on the local control funding formula. We've had workshops on Boyle Heights for youth and youth advocacy in general. We've had workshops on Prop 47 and the reduced sentencing. We've had workshops on restorative justice. So we've done a lot of work and put have invested a lot of time and energy into this idea of collective songwriting.
The band Quetzal and individual artists that are part of that collective have really been working from a place of deep heritage and community aesthetics and values and exploring a lot of different kinds of music, and also a process that is part of all kinds of traditional arts, a process that's rooted in community. And so from that emerges Quetzal's collective songwriting methodology, which is very hand in glove with traditional arts processes. And so it was very natural evolution for ACTA to be able to take advantage of these artists who have a lot of experience in this methodology and to bring that to a larger scale in Boyle Heights.
Collective songwriting as a method and the ways in which Chicano Artivistas implement it in community has roots in the Zapatista movement. The Zapatista movement is a movement that really identifies autonomy and self-determination for communities in struggle. A group of Chicano artists, activists, went to Chiapas and studied these methods, and the musicians studying these Zapatista methods developed the collective songwriting method, along with a very important figure in the movement, and her name is Rosa Marta Zarate.
This is coming out of a Chicano tradition, Chicano community that has been doing art and activism for many decades. It's part of the ethos, part of the fabric of the Chicano community. And so collective songwriting has now become a very important piece of that fabric that not only establishes a space where a community can have a conversation through the composition of a song, but that artists themselves have a space at the table for social justice and organizing.
It's a recycling world. Everybody sing that for me, please. Nice and loud. Da, da. I'm recycling my bad ways to make some better days. It's a recycling world. Again, nice and loud. I'm recycling my bad ways to make some better days. It's a recycling world.
At my mama's face, man, tears in her eyes. Asking God, why did he do this to me? This is playing like a movie. Stuck in the sand, trying to find another plan. I'm not gonna be that bum man, kicking that can. I'm trying to be a grown man, handle my priorities as a young teen minority.
Shine like me, cause everybody's not the same. My dreams is like never ending rain. If you took a couple steps in my shoes, you will feel my pain. Life full of crime, a lot of things in my mind. Teen life's getting took, so I'm trying to refrain. The dirty south is the place from where I came. Trying to make a living, can't hold chump change. Cops killing off African Americans. It's a cold world that we're living in. Can't take it, so you know I find different ways to claim life. So I gotta get it in.
connected across the world, and particularly with Mexico and the Indigena, and that we carry that with us. So people have to know again, we take the Indigena with us wherever we're at. And again, as far as people know it, I get it. It's hard for us to know. I've been making a life work of knowing my Indigena roots and knowing, at least the last 25, 30 years. But I think the idea being that we don't lose it and keep it strong. And I think the music is one of the ways it is, because even though the music gets transmuted with a lot of, colonial conquest, but also other people coming in, it also keeps the roots. The roots are always there, and I find that to be important. I also love that you work with these troubled youth, these kids that nobody wants to work with. As you know, I do this work. Quetzal does this work. I've been going to prisons, juvenile halls in jails for over 40 years. It's been one of the best work I love. And I'm sad that during the pandemic we're not able to get back in there, but it's just one of the most amazing things I know. And I know that the people in those prisons are hungry for this knowledge, hungry for these connections. Not just our gente, because there's a lot of Chicanada there, but even African Americans, even others, some of the Asian brothers, and some even the whites that are looking for who they are beyond white, whatever that is. That's a made up term anyway. But the point being that the rooted you are, the more expansive you can be. One thing that I did want to talk to you about, and this might be a good time, is I found it to be fascinating, your relationship with your father and your family. And I think it would be good if we did. That's one of again, I haven't finished the book. I'm barely getting to the first part, but that really captured me. I guess because all of us have some of that. My father was he wasn't like your dad. He was maybe he was emotionally detached. He was frío. He never said, I love you, never hugged us. He would work, come home, and I knew that he had a dream. His dream was different. It wasn't music. He wanted to be a writer. Can you imagine?
Wow.
I know. And he wrote a book in Mexico, and he couldn't never meet that dream. He ended up retiring as a janitor. He had got educated. Unlike a lot of Mexicanos, he went through all the schools. He actually was a biologist and wanted to he wrote a book of biology. And then I found out that my grandfather, his father, wrote 5 political tracts in Mexico, revolutionary tracts. Again, I didn't know this because my mother did not want to encourage my writing. Pobrecita, I love her. But you know how it is when you're a working class Mexicano, you work, don't complain, don't explain. Just do your work, don't rock no boats. Aguante, the culture of aguante que tenemos,
Yep.
And my mom thought it was a waste of time. Imagine how that is.
Yeah.
You want to paint art, you want to paint, oh, what a waste of time. She threw away all my murals I had on plywood, and she threw away all my writing that I had in grocery bags. Okay, I still love my mom. I don't blame her. She's gone. They're both gone. There's no sense throwing, But what I really appreciate your story, though, is how it made you become interested in music. Your dad's madness in many ways because of the music, but also not being able to see fruition in his life, but also the pain of having him fall apart, really. And that's really painful. So I want you to, if you can, talk about it's just powerful part of your book, because it is very densely written. It's got a lot of academic, really knowledge, but it's also got this beautiful moments of your own personal life.
Thank you. That means so much coming from you. My dad, I think watching my dad not live his dream out, I think was difficult. I think that you try to blame yourself for his depression, for his sadness, for his drinking, for his abusiveness for many years. And then you become really angry at him because he was very abusive, and things happen an experience that children should never have to experience. But it happened, and then one day he was gone, and then he became a vagrant. He was but he always was very como soñaba. It's like, I want to. And singing, I talked to so-and-so, he'd be kind of delirious at some point, and he'd say, I have a very important meeting, totally dirty and messed up, missing teeth, broken legs, saying he was about to have a very important meeting with the music producer, and things like that, right? And so much so that he was known in the streets as el artista. That's how my brother would find him actually when we wouldn't hear from him for a while. He'd go out and look for him and say, Carlos, Carlos Gonzalez, and, ask him, Carlos Javier, and then he's, pues, ¿cómo es? How is he? He's like, whoa, he's like, he likes to sing, oh, el artista, they'd say, so all the, the folks knew him as el artista. And so anyhow, he, that, I don't think it's, I think the thing that I unpacked over time is not the fact that, I guess that the fact that he died thinking that like the dream didn't come true, and of course alcoholism does not help. It doesn't make you think clearly. It's just not the thing, and I'm not blaming it on that. Like I mentioned in the book, I think that what his illusion of what success was completely warped, and part of what capitalism does to us, right? What is a success? When are you successful, right? And that, I think, is part of capital, right? Part of that Western paradigm of getting you to think like, this is how you really got to be. This is lo que te venden, right? What they're selling you. And I think that that is what I realized over time, and how I was able to forgive him in a lot of ways, to think like, wow, modernity, he grows up in, in the 40s and 50s, the 50s, at the height of the golden age of Mexican cinema, where they would value the indígena, but also sort of like always portrayed as backwards, and like, modernization was a way to go, and, bolero, and of course our music is beautiful, right? But even the bolero had a very cosmopolitan, like, city-like, like modern sense, right? It wasn't the rancheras, of course, were important, and bolero groups also, but the whole idea around when he grew up was about modernizing and progressing, el progreso, And so I understood that. And so for an immigrant to come here and want to be a superstar or a crooner like Javier Solis or Jorge Negrete, is like, that was his dream. But that's the only way he can think that he could be a part of music and live the life of a musician. And again, if we don't have the social spaces, I think my dad found like Son Jarocho, for example, or Fandango, had he experienced that, had he seen there's other ways of being in music that are more real, honestly, and more fulfilling than just being on the stage and being adored, or whatever that illusion is, of what the successful musician is, And because that is an illusion, and it's not real, it's a business, it's a way you do certain things, all of that stuff that is out there is really an illusion. And I think that we're chasing the carrot if we think that that is the way to be. And that's what I realized my dad never realized and never came to like understand. And so I raised my son to think about music. Okay, if he's going to get up on stage, there has to be a level of musicianship that like, hey, tampoco, like you can be real cute, but if you sing out of tune there on stage, there's two value systems in my book. The value systems of the stage. And if you're going to get up there, then you better be ready to be critiqued. Like, that's part of it. Like, people are buying, your music, people are listening to you, right? And then if you're going to be in Fandango, it's another value system. It's about how present of a human being can you be? How deep into convivencia are you with the group? And que tocar con la comunidad, de eso se trata. That's what it's about. But the stage is another thing, right? And so
it's a love of the artistry. It's a love of the skills that you need to have, which I agree is very important, regardless of what it is, theater or writing or dance or music, but also to say that it's not limited by, am I fame, am I, making a lot of money, whatever it might be. I think that's important. One thing I do want to point out is, going back to your father's, your forgiveness into it. It's, all of us have gone through that. In one of my memoirs, I mentioned my dad. He wasn't abusive like your dad. He didn't hit nobody, but he did molest my sisters, and he tried to molest the granddaughters. He had a big problem. There was a big problem with him. His unraveling was quite horrible, destructive. It destroyed the whole family. I didn't know that he was doing this because it was something that was being done only to the girls. And me and my brother, we just hated my dad because he wasn't close. He was so cold and detached. We didn't know what he was doing. And then when it finally got revealed, it just destroyed the whole family. It was very hard to get through that. And I think important part of being an artivista, being an activist, a revolutionary, a musician, artist, writer, is to also have healing. the forgiveness part was important. I know this is hard for a lot of us who've been highly traumatized, who've been molested and hurt within their own families. But if we don't find a healing through this, and I find art, music, writing to be healing. It's not the only healing thing, but it's powerfully healing. And I know that you got to the point where you could forgive him. I'm sure that whatever he did was so, I mean, how can anybody forgive anybody? But if we don't find those healing moments, we're gonna just carry the poison and the pain and respond as more poison and more pain.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's right. And yeah, I have experience with all that. And I think that the art and the music that I personally have produced and been a part of, has been very healing. And I think that those community moments have been healing and have helped me understand the bigger picture of how capital works, like how these structures that are, something like capitalism, right, is more than just an economic system. It's a social system. It arranges, it causes mass migration because people can't make for them and a living for themselves and they come here, and then it changes families. Look, your dad wasn't able to do what he wanted to do because he had to work his ass off. Because I mean, all of those things, like all these connections, helped me really not excuse what he did, because we have in the family the same things that your sister went through, but also kind of understand and was able to forgive part of that. But of course, my own sense of constantly is to exercising that pain and, like, through my own self-expression has always been really important and continues to be. And it just, it's just something that I think that, which is why I think that this community work is also really important, because there's a lot of people like us out there, right? There's that are not going to have a professional career, right? But I think that if we had more of these community spaces where people are expressing themselves in community and getting that, all that, the tension and the life, like, anguish out and whatever it is, I think we'd have a lot less mental health. Our social movements would be much more, sustainable.
Exactly.
There's a lot of things, like, to me, Fandango, for example, and as well as the collective songwriting stuff and teaching other musicians to do it as well, is the social movement. It's another way of thinking, because it's not the marches and the picket signs and all.
Right.
All of those things are really taxing. They take energy from us. And that's important stuff to do. But I think there's also this other way of being in community that can also be very healing and generative, right? Can be regenerative as opposed to extractive.
That's very cool. I know we can keep talking, Marta, but we do have some questions, and we don't have too much time. But I do think we should take some questions. I mean, because you and me are having this amazing dialogue, and we can keep going for a long time. But let's see what some of the questions are. And I don't know if Michael, who's actually our tech guy, if we're gonna get him to the chat, or how are you gonna do it?
He's gonna put him in the chat. I think you might put him in the chat.
Okay.
Yes, he's gonna send it through here. He's being.
So let's see what ones we can get. It's supposed to be interactive here, so.
All right. Okay. Let's hear him. Yes.
I think he's typing in the first question.
Through, yes. It's,
no, I was going really well with your conversation. I almost wasn't going to get questions, but I think it's only right to hear from some of the people.
Okay. So I as the question is coming in, I wanted to sort of say that again, most of the time this book is really not necessarily advocating for the annihilation of commodity culture and art. It's not about that. I think, okay. Yes, if anybody has any questions, please let us know. But it's not about annihilating that,
Right.
It's about bringing, again, like being more deliberate about all that processed work,
Well, one thing that you said I think is important is always go back to community. And we have a saying at Tia Chuchas that community is our mother. And even if you go out and try to get a professional career in your art, which is fine, don't lose your connection with community. And one of the ways to keep those connections is what you're doing. Going back, teaching, having those spaces. the songwriting spaces, but also the fandango spaces where people can be expressive and know that it's good to be expressive the way they understand it, and giving them spaces that can also teach and allow them to develop. The craft of it to me is almost like it's not about professionalism or nothing, but if you're going to be professional, you do have to know what you're doing, and it's good. It opens doors if you want to go that way. Because I get it. Some people get tired of having to work 8 to 5 somewhere and then having to do the art on the side. I might as well do it for your living, and if you can, but just keep that integrity, which I think is what you're developing. The integrity of the art, integrity of yourself. Don't shape yourself around what the commodification does. You know what I'm trying to say. I see it in movies. I see it in all kinds of places. Uh, be true to who you are, but also be able to have that kind of sense that I can make something of it.
Yeah. I mean, it really is about, and that's kind of what I try to talk about. Two very different ways of thinking about music and art, and really, if anything, this book that I try to get more than anything is to get people to think about music and art not just as a commodity, but other ways it can exist in our lives. You know, that there are other
Yes.
ways.
Here's the book. I don't know if you can see it right, but
It's okay, but I have to say you're right. It's a total academic book in that way. It's like, you know, I'm an associate professor at Scripps College, you know, and in Claremont as part of the Intercollegiate Chicano Latino Studies Department, and you know, a lot of the things that we utilize. The techniques that I utilize in the classroom are the techniques I'm talking about in this book. So it's been really great.
So one question is, what material regarding the psychology of the Chicano do you recommend? Do you have other books or other materials that you recommend for people? I think the Mexico Profundo book is very good. It's very important. That's when it's in English too. People should find it. Batalla, right? ¿Cómo se llama?
Bonfil Batalla. Yeah.
Yes, right, exactly. So people can, that's a really good one. But there's others. Do you recommend others?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you know, there's actually a course at the Scripps at Pomona College that was started by Professor Raymond Buriel, que en paz descanse. But he has a lot of wonderful, you know, if we're talking about the field of psychology, you want to read folks like Raymond Buriel, Guadalupe Basios, you know, psychologists like in that sense. But if you want to read, you know, the other ways in which, as Chicanos, you know, we express ourselves in so many different mediums, and one of course, the key figures has been Gloria Anzaldua, Chela Sandoval, with Methodology of the Oppressed. That's an important, very important book. Anything by Gloria Anzaldua. And then, of course, you have other wonderful psychologists like Aida Hurtado, you know, so many wonderful Chicana feminist scholars.
There really is a lot of good books and materials now. The other question that I'm seeing is, have you seen the collective songwriting method translated to other art forms, be it dance, photography, painting, video?
Yes, I have. And actually, as part of the collective songwriting and then also learning from the Fandango, we saw quite a bit of people. For example, there's a woman, a professor in the University of Washington, and her name is Michelle Habel Payan. She's a mentor, and she really took this idea of the collective and took it to the archive, right? And as a person who was documenting women in movement and women in music, she realized also that there can't just be one person deciding what was important enough to archive, that people need to decide it as community, as, you know, as a collective. And that was something that really challenges how we think about the archiving, right? And so she took it and started Women Who Rock, which is a collective of women who decide collectively what to archive, and they basically decide and set in motion and begin to do a lot of oral histories, women in different spaces, and so that's a wonderful project. So that's the first thing that came to mind when that question came up.
Absolutely. And you know, again, through Quetzal Flores and the Alliance for California Traditional Arts, where I work with Quetzal, and we take this to the prisons. We bring cultural traditional arts to the prisons, and it's collective teaching on, from weaving to danza to, of course, son jarocho, and I do the creative writing part. We
Yeah.
do the same thing in those settings.
Yeah.
The other question is going into 2021, how do we keep the progress and momentum going in our community? How do we support our students' mental health?
Well, I think for me, I think it's really important for us to, for one, to alter how we're teaching. You know, as a teacher, I'm thinking, you know, I do a lot more creative, sort of human connection type stuff, as opposed to like show me, let's have a dialogue, and gauging sort of. I do test, but it depends on the course. But for the most part, I'm really trying to remind people and students that human connection, and I think we can all agree with this right now, especially in the pandemic, is really important. We didn't realize how much even absolute strangers need each other, right? To be somewhere listening to music, or to go and eat somewhere, sit down, or at a park bench. I mean, even the benches are blocked off. I mean, esa convivencia, ese ambiente, to have folks around, even folks you don't know, we need each other as human beings. This moment makes us realize that. And I think the more we can assign things that are about connection, introspection, writings that have to do with, or TikToks or memes. I mean, think about it. Young people are on TikTok all the time. That's the way they're connecting. I give assignments that have to do with TikTok, also assignments that have to do with karaoke, for example. We have something called critical karaoke, where they have to choose a song, and they can talk over the song and sing along with it sometimes, but they have to tell me what is important about the song, why it moved them, what it reminds them of, and like all of these things, which, by the way, I took from a wonderful, which is recommended by the Pop Conference, by a wonderful woman that wrote an article about it, and her name is, oh my God, I can't believe it'll come to me. Oh my God, she's an African American writer. Oh my God, I hope Michelle's watching. I'm gonna text somebody and find out. This is terrible. I apologize, but she's wonderful.
But do you also, how do you do the fandangos during this pandemic? That's one question people ask. How is that being done during this period of lockdowns?
You know, I think that tal cual, just like an actual fandango, people haven't been able to do it, right? I think that some folks have gone together in a park and social distance with masks and try to do it. It's not the same thing, but I think there are other ways, right? The one thing about fandango is that there are so many different mediums. You can be an instrument player, you can be a singer, you can be a versador, and so I think everybody's sort of gone into different things. I, for one, have been very involved in learning more about versada, right? How to construct poetry, poetic prose, décimas, cuartetas, quintetas, how to construct those things with a very prominent teacher. Thanks to a colleague of mine, her name is Maria de la Rosa in the Bay Area. She pulled on one of the maestros, Patricio Hidalgo, who has been giving multiple workshops. We're from the LA one. La Marisol is part of it. So is Luis and Doña Leti from the Bay Area. And so we're all coming together, and we learn every Monday from him for an hour and 15 minutes, and then we go. And we help him financially, of course, but also he's very generous about his time and what he's teaching us. And that's another way of continuing the skill building, so that we can be better practitioners in the fandango, which has been really wonderful, like building the skill set.
Absolutely. That's very good. We have maybe one more question, and this is a personalist, political, a feminist practice. Any tips on how you all approach in integrating your political beliefs into personal relationships that are liberating? That's a very good, well-packed question. Yeah.
Yes. Beliefs to personal relationships that are liberating. Well, I think, first of all, it's really important to be self-critical, right? Because I think that even though you may have a political ideology and espouse something, I think that it's the talking is very easy. I think it's very important to demonstrate that through your work as well. I've tried to do that my entire life. when I talk about Chicana feminism, it's more than just, I try to be a good friend, an honest friend, right? A good tia to my nieces, right? A good sister, an honest sister, and not, I think it's really important. There's women, I think that I also, in the work that I do, I pull on a lot of women. I've done projects like Entre Mujeres, and I've pulled on women to participate, those that were very skilled and those that weren't so skilled, in order, because I knew the desire and I knew, the work. And so I think that, in any which way that we can do it, right? I think that it's really important for us to live it, right? To not only theorize and produce the work, but also to live on the daily, being open and, building those friendships, that honesty, right?
Yeah.
And the sincerity.
There you go. Being authentic. One of the things is going back to the Mexica concept of inixli in your lot, which is face and heart, the alignment of what you present to what you have essentially. And I think that's where we're at, aligning ourselves now. And even in our political work, it is personal political. I try to develop it as best I can, growing up as a mutated male, tough guy, gang member, all these kind of things that they teach you in the street. You got to be one step ahead of everybody, do or die. I had to unlearn a lot of street, barrio life living, because part of it, what I think is true, part of it is that good warrior spirit that got distorted with capitalism and poverty and the traumas of our lives, colonialism. It distorts it. But you don't want to get rid of that warrior spirit, which belongs to men and women and anybody else. It's like, but you want to get rid of the features of what you people think a warrior is. This tough guy, this cold guy, this, I'm going to hurt people. Doesn't matter why, I can justify it. But the point is, I had to learn that, and the movimiento taught me that. The movimiento in its own way, maybe not even entirely conscious, was teaching me that the warrior spirit could continue. So now that I'm 66 years old, I'm still in that spirit, only it's older, it's hopefully wiser, it's hopefully more elder, more like, okay, there's another way I can present this. But it's very important to align with your relationships, align with yourself, align your passions, your gifts, your genius with the way you present yourself in the world. That, I think, is the struggle to overcome a lot of the traumas. And again, I think you and me and others who've gone through this, it's not like we've overcome everything. Now we're all happy-go-lucky. What it is we've learned to find a wholeness in the midst of all this brokenness. And again, I've done what you did. I saw in your book, you forgave your father. I've forgiven him. It said, my duty to forgive him. It really wasn't about him. It was about me. It wasn't so much about forgiving him. Actually, he's dead. He's gone. Who knows? Who cares? It wasn't about that. It was about me. I needed to forgive him. I needed to forgive him so I can forgive myself. Because the pain that he inflicts on you, you carry. And I was hurting people, and I was kind of being like my dad. Unfortunately, not in the way he would did it, but still, I was detached. I was cold. I was drinking all the time. I was on heroin. All these things that you realize is just your own personal unraveling. I had to forgive him to forgive myself. And that was part of the work. So I think it might be a good way to end there. Maybe you might have a few comments there so we can kind of end, but that might be something to think about.
Yeah, it makes me think about, I love that, because those lessons that you learned are really important, right? And in my case, and I think this happens to a lot of women, like, sort of subjecting yourself to abuse is not something that you're going to continue to take, right? It's something that, in my case, I was like, I kept being, sort of somebody who would let things happen, and or like, oh, I don't want to fight, it's fine, oh, I don't want to, and at some point, I think that I learned and I realized that I'm not going to be that person anymore. I'm not going to. I have a voice. I have a way of. I have analysis. Soy inteligente. I'm smart. I do as best I can, but I'm also not going to be that person that the system, other people, and the system is not going to abuse the way I think about art and music and life, and that's just somebody that I'm glad these lessons have led me to this, and I'm not saying I don't struggle with it at times, right?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, is this okay? This they're asking me to do this, should I not do it? Like, no, like I value the work that I do. I've built a language around what we do and why I think it's important. And I think that's something that we also need to do. Whatever it is that we do, to learn to build a language around it so that we can advocate for our communities, advocate for ourselves, and continue to build and hopefully have a body of work as respected and as loved as the one that you have, Luis. Thank you so much for all you do
No,
and for
thank you.
today. Thank you.
It was a great talk. We could have done this for hours. We'll try to maybe do something else. We got to do some more. Please donate to Tia Chuchas. This is what we created Tia Chuchas for, to have these kind of spaces, dialogues, discussions, and also to connect with the wide-ranging community we have. We have amazing people all around us. And also buy the book, Chicano, Chicanas, Artivistas, Music, Community, and Transborder Tactics in East Los Angeles. Marta Gonzalez just came out, I guess, in August. But it's a beautiful book. Yeah, it's academic, but I will say,
I'm like critiquing capitalism. Then I'm like, buy my book. I'm kidding.
But that's okay. Well, but you point out a very important point that we should say, because Tia Chuchas is also a bookstore, and we have it. But here's the thing:
Hey.
We're trying to get important knowledge in the hands of our community. So there's a purpose that's not about I'm just bettering myself. You could have written a much more exciting book with none of the analysis, and maybe you would have made more money.
Stuff, yes.
Yeah. But you're doing this book, and this is the book that's going to teach and leave an impression deeper than. So you're doing the right thing. And again, people have to buy these things. It's just the nature of it. But we're buying a bunch of junk out there. I don't know.
Right?
I'm not talking bad about anything, but even some of the Starbucks, whatever. I hate to say it. I said it. Oh my God. I mean, people buy. Okay, good. I mean, you buy coffee. I mean, but buy a book. Buy an amazing, decent book. Get a CD or music from Quetzal. do that thing that helps all of us get stronger in what we do. So thank you otra vez. Muchas gracias, Lazo Kamati. You're amazing, Marta. You're a beautiful friend to Tia Chuchas and the community, and we're going to do this again. Got to.
Love you guys. Thank you.
Okay.
acerca a su fin y bien da pena que tanto